Kia ora koutou. Ko Pamela Bell, toku ingoa. I'm Pamela Bell. I'm the Chief Everything Officer here at the New Zealand Institute of Building. And it's my pleasure today to be joined by members of Mates in Construction and CHASNZ, the Construction Health and Safety for New Zealand Association. So we are going to get right into it. I'm going to hand over to John Chapman, who heads up Mates, who will open us up with a karakia, and then we'll have some introductions. John, over to you.
Pamela, me trotahi na mihi te atua. E onore, korori e te mate mate. Tēnā katoa. Mene, te mea tuaroa, ko John Chapman ahau, CEO for Mates in Construction, otherwise known as the Cleaner. And I like that new one, Chief Executive Officer. That's so, me, thank you for the invite to this session and my industry, Chris.
Thanks, John. I'm getting a slightly garbled audio. Is anyone else getting that? Yeah. Okay. Let's throw next to Chris for introductions, and we'll just keep an eye on that. Chris.
Hi, Pamela. Is my audio good? Can you hear me? Yep. Cool. Hey, hi everyone. I'm Chris Alderson. Look, I'm the Chief Exec at Construction Health and Safety New Zealand. We're a charitable trust, sometimes acronised as CHASNZ or CHASNZ. We haven't quite worked out how to say it yet after 6 years. Yeah, we're basically an industry body, as I said, not for profit. We sort of represent government, workers and industries for a tripartite organisation, looking at reducing all types of harm in the construction industry. And my second hat that I'll put on today is I'm also a director at Mates in Construction. Hence my presence on the call today.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And Lauren.
Kia ora, ko Lauren Donnan toku ingoa. I'm the Research, Evaluation and Innovation Manager here at Mates in Construction. So I get the awesome job of doing all our training evaluations and undertaking research with workers in the industry to make sure that everything we do is informed by worker voice. So it's wonderful to be here today. Thank you for having us, and I'll pass to Nate.
Awesome, thank you. And my name is Nate. I am one of the Christchurch-based field officers for Mates in Construction. Basically, what a field officer is, for those that don't quite understand. So I'm really the boots on the ground element of Mates. The bulk of my job is getting out, facilitating training, workshops, talking to people, being that connection and kind of that face to Mates. I guess with that intro, it's a good opportunity to sort of segue into a bit of a safety element before we sort of proceed further with this. So if we can bring up that safety slide, that would be awesome. Awesome. So for us here at Mates, safety is a huge part of what we do, not just within our trainings, but anytime we're on site facilitating these conversations. Today, we're obviously going to touch on the topic of suicide, and that's not to cause any distress. It's more to sort of highlight and paint a picture of the issue and what we're facing here within the construction industry. We have a list of numbers and support lines that you can contact if you wish to contact throughout this conversation. You feel this isn't for you, by all means, even before we kick off, if this isn't a conversation, if it's not your day to have this conversation, and we understand that completely, by all means, don't feel like you have to sit in on this conversation, but there are some support elements there, including the Mate support line that you can contact if needed. Awesome, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, folks, and thanks, Nate. And on the timing as well, if this isn't your day, this is a recorded webinar, and you'll find it on the Institute of Building's website under the Resources tab, along with all the other industry insights and a bunch of other resources that you can just plug into anytime. So yeah, I think that's awesome advice if it's not your day. Right, now we have got 5 really cool questions to dig into. We're absolutely talking about positive stuff that is happening in the industry right now, and we will be leaving you with some tips as we all break for the summer season. So first of all, question to Nate in the first instance. Can you tell us a bit more about the mahi that Mates in Construction and CHASNZ do?
Awesome. Well, on the mate side of things, I guess if I was to describe the work that we do, I think the bulk of it is about empowering the workforce, our workers, and that's really come out of a need, a requirement. And that was one that was recognised, and that's been the high rate of suicides within our construction industry here in New Zealand. I think the big takeaway for us here at Mates is it's very focused towards the industry, right? That is our target sector. It's an at-risk sector here in New Zealand, and that's why the bulk of the work that we do is sort of for the industry, funded by the industry. And I think what's really interesting and really cool about the way that we do our mahi, it's comprehensive. It covers all aspects from promotion, the prevention side of things, which falls into a lot of education, also the suicide intervention and even the postvention aspects of suicide. And we are aligned with New Zealand's Every Life Matters strategy, which I think is really a really important factor. But for us to be able to cover all those elements, it's a huge benefit for us, right? Because it's almost like that one-stop shop in terms of who we're going to for our support on all ends of that space. And I find that a lot of what we do is around sort of supporting those workplace environments. I talked a bit before about empowerment. The education and training that we provide is about empowering those within the workforce to recognise the stress, how to connect to support. We have our various levels of training, right? And the thing we want to do is give people tools, right? So end of the day, when they're in their workplace, even outside of the workplace, they have these skills and tools that they can fall back on, which we'll probably get into a bit later on what those can all sort of look like. But, whether it is our training, so providing the tools and the trainings, using this sort of a holistic approach, Te Whare Tapawhai comes to mind for us here at Mates. But we also have our Mates support line and our case management team. And our role really is to be that connection, especially for myself as a field officer. I'm on the ground. I sort of generate that on-site engagement. And that's probably my favorite aspect of the job, being a field officer, is I'm on the ground. I get to talk to people. I get to see what they're dealing with, what's going through, their minds in a sort of open back and forth conversation where it doesn't really feel like, that it's more open in the sense that there's a trust element because they see me coming day to day or week and week, and we can build that trust. We can have these conversations, which are, hard conversations to have with, say, a stranger. And I think that's, for me anyway, it makes that sort of peer-driven element of it, right? Empowering people within the industry to support themselves, support their mates is a huge part of it. But that's, I guess, from the mates' perspective, that's the mahi that we do. Chris, I guess you can add to your end.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. So look, as I said, CHASNZ has been around about 6 years. So we started in 2018, and it was basically a realisation from the industry that we weren't quite making the progress that we wanted to around harm. The way we look at harm is at kind of 3 levels. So we look at obviously catastrophic type harm, so major type disaster type thing, Pike River obviously comes to mind. But in the construction sense, that sort of relates to things like major scaffolding collapses, design issues in buildings. So that's one set. The other set that you most commonly see, in the papers is what we call critical risk or critical harm. So, when someone's been fatally injured at work, or there's been a very serious accident where someone was also killed. So we do work in that area quite a bit, close conjunction with WorkSafe, obviously. But far the most prevalent thing that we deal with is what we call chronic harm. So chronic harm affects nearly all our workers to some degree, and it kind of comes in 2 ways. It's sort of both physical and non-physical in terms of mental, but they're all related, is the issue. It's very hard to actually separate out, physical and mental harm sometimes because of the interrelationships. If you're sore, being a tradie, if you're injured, if you're carrying an injury, it's more likely that you're going to be suffering from some kind of depression or anxiety as a result of it, and vice versa. So there's known relationships there. So it's really important for us to make sure that we do work at all levels. We're a very small organisation, so we're only 7 people. So what we tend to do is we tend to be like a catalyst. So we try and initiate interventions across the industry at those levels. One of the things we looked at around about 5 years ago was, look, we've got a realization that there's a serious amount of harm potentially in the construction industry around poor mental health, suicide, depression, anxiety, and we didn't really understand the relationship then. We probably are starting to see more of a relationship and understand that now, but we did know that we had to do something, and we were looking for an evidence-based solution to that, and that's where MATES came up. So MATES, the reason why we liked it was we'd had already 11 years worth of history of it working in Australia, really strong research base to it, really strong, I guess, core interventions around making sure that you've got a good psychosocial safety climate through the destigmatisation, setting up peer-to-peer networks, and really focusing on early help seeking. So that's what we really liked at that stage, and why we've always been very keen to actually support MATES, work with them, and make sure that we're actually doing things that have a strong evidence base behind them. And that continues, and I know that Lauren, John, and Nate are going to talk about some more of that today as well. So hand back to you guys.
Great. I just had one qualifying question actually, because of course most of the folks tuning in will be fitting into a type of role or persona, either a site-based role or management at site or a managing director owner, for example. I'm thinking of those kind of 3 tiers or personas. How does that change the way they interface with MATES? I mean, what's in it for each of those types of roles, or what would they look to, or how would they engage? Is that the way you guys think about things in terms of framing up the offering?
Who wants to say that, Lauren? Want to have a
I
crack?
can, or Nate. I'd say because of the way the MATES program is rolled out, where we go onto sites and deliver to the full site, we do capture that breadth of workers and those in leadership roles, because change comes from really important that it comes from our leaders, having those tools, role modeling those tools. But also as we do our research and understand where those different areas of need are, we can innovate and change the MATES program. And so some of the things we have in the pipeline, for example, is a supervisor or management level targeted program. So things like that as well. But for the most part, we capture that breadth of the industry through just, our on-site programs.
Great. And I think we're probably all familiar with your Fly the Flag initiative, which is a way that owner directors and whole teams can get involved and really signal support. And then that's where we see flags flying off the scaffolding. What time of year does that occur again?
There are
John?
usually,
No, I was going to say, I'll hand it to you, Nate, and you said it at the same time.
I'm saying that usually lines up with the falling of World Suicide Prevention Day. So it's either the first, second week of September, around there. But yeah, it is about raising the branding of MATE. But I think what most importantly, it's about just a bit of a reminder for people to check in on themselves. That flag sort of represents more than just MATE. So it represents an opportunity to check in on yourself, check in on your mates, and that's kind of what we hope it reflects when people see that flag. It's not so much about the MATES branding as per se. It is about the message and the what we're trying to incorporate within those cultures, as Lauren was saying before.
Great. So at a minimum, that's a way that people would have engaged with before to date. Yeah, cool. I'm sure other aspects of your mahi will come out in the next few questions, but the next one, Nate, while we've got you, tell us about 2024. How would you recap the year that was? I'm sure many of us will be glad to have it in the review mirror very shortly, but we're interested to focus on the highlights, any reports that you've released, events, how did the Fly the Flag campaign go? Yeah, tell us about the good stuff.
Yeah, well, I think from a field office perspective, in the year being up to, I think, the end of November, we had about 750 trainings, and that was touching about just over 10,000 people. And it's, again, not just the awareness that people are leaving with when they finish these trainings. There's sort of viable tools that people can use and take not only into their workplace, but outside of that with their day-to-day lives between, family, friends. All of those skills are not just restricted to workplace. And that's huge for us to be able to get across so many different partners and those within our sphere of influence. And it's not just the bigger regions as well, right? We're touching, obviously we've got field offices based within Christchurch, Auckland, but smaller regions which maybe lack an access to services, right? That's one factor we often come across, or maybe there's a service within these smaller regions that don't necessarily fit with those within our industry that are struggling. So we can be there on the ground. We do a lot of regional travel, and that sort of provides connection, access to services which people may not have known were available. So I think that's a really important element for us this year, has been getting out and about. In terms of people reaching out and getting back to us, it's huge. Like every training we do, we offer people the opportunity post-training that if they have something that they want to talk about, maybe they need some help or they want to delve into some of the topics that we've talked about, then we offer them the opportunity to receive a callback. And those numbers, to date, I believe we've had over 11,000 callbacks, which is huge. When you think about our industry as a whole, right, we have a vulnerable workforce. A lot of those vulnerable age groups as well, our 16 to 25-year-olds, a very vulnerable age group, also a group that can often be reluctant to sort of reach out and access their help. So being able to break into those spaces, I know Lauren could probably talk to more, but it's the same again with our Māori and Pacifica people, right? People that are often underrepresented within our support services. But here at Mates, we're trying to build those connections in terms of the way that we communicate, operate to help sort of bridge that access. And I know, Lauren, you'll be able to go a lot deeper into that in terms of a recap.
Lauren, tell us a bit more about the hard to reach folks, the regions, that age group, Māori Pacifica. Can you tell us a bit more?
Absolutely. So the research that we do in part is to have a look at the trainings that Mates have delivered and the different aspects of our services. So from those different levels of training, from those coming into our case management support, and understanding who it is that's accessing those services, and also having a look at those shifts in stigma reduction. Would you reach out for help? Would you know how to access help, offer help, etc.? So it means that we can track those shifts. Because if you think about the kaupapa of Mates and the overarching goal that we're trying to achieve is that whole culture shift in our industry, that it's okay to talk about mental health and to make sure everyone's empowered, as Nate said. So when we look at those stats, we can see that last year, over 30% increase in workers who went through our trainings feeling confident in reaching out for help and supporting another person. Up to for noticing someone struggling, which is really difficult because it can be really subtle changes in behaviour. So getting that up over 80% for people who went through our first 2 tiers of training is so great to know that within that workforce, 8 and 10 who've been through our training would feel confident to notice a colleague not travelling well. And another one is up 94% of people who did those first 2 levels of training feeling confident to support that mate and connect them into help. So great outcomes for us. When you look at our assist training, which is the highest level, so that's where if there's an incident on site and someone is feeling suicidal, they are the person that can come in and support that person, get them to a place of safety. And it was 98% felt confident to support that person following that 2-day training, which is such a massive asset to have on site, growing that mental health workforce of people who can support someone in some of their worst times. When we look to who it is accessing our services and our case management, that I think 20% of our case management clients for this last year were Māori or Pacifica, which for us is such a brilliant stat because of what Nate said, that traditionally services may not be culturally appropriate or feel accessible or for whatever reason. And I think the beauty of Mates, where we really build those relationships with workers so that when they need us, they know who we are, and feel confident reaching out and coming into our support services. And we had a really high percentage of workers from that rangatahi age group as well, which we know has high rates of suicide as well as within the construction industry. So we're kind of going out of 2024 feeling really proud of the reach we've had, the impact we've had, and who we've been able to support this year. Yeah.
That's awesome. Did anyone else want to add anything?
I can talk slightly more
Yeah.
about
we had the highlights, Lauren.
Yeah. The highlights in terms of just the research this year that we've been able to feed into systems change, which I think we have to celebrate that that's something that Mates does. So absolutely, we look at our workforce and we're there to support them. But if we can't look upstream and see what are those policies, what are those issues feeding down and making it hard for workers, that I feel is such an important piece of the puzzle. So this year we were able to feed into the Suicide Prevention Action Plan using workers' voices that we've gathered. So over 2,000 workers in our wellbeing survey and over 100 workers in dedicated focus groups so that we could hear what was going on via that survey with a large group, and then get together groups of migrant workers, apprentices, female, etc., and really dig into what those look like for individual groups so that we can shape what we do, but shape the bigger system. So I just really want to put that in there to highlight that that's such a win for 2024 and what we'll carry on doing.
Those are huge numbers. Are they just in New Zealand, Lauren, or is it across Australia?
This is just Mates New Zealand. So we lean on the incredible history that Mates has, which Chris mentioned earlier. So we've got all that backing as well, but it's so important we contextualise it to our workers and Aotearoa. That's our trainings, our research. So we want our workers' voice to shape what we do. That's
incredible. I'm blown away by the stats. And Nate, you said 10,000 people you've touched in the last year. So that's huge. Okay, awesome. Later on, I'm going to ask a little bit more about what we look out for in our mates, but maybe near the end. Hey, folks, in terms of looking to the future, let's talk a bit more about people skills. What I've heard reframed as strong skills, which I think is a really great term that we need to carry with us through the construction industry. Chris, can you tell us about some of those important strong skills we need to be thinking about as we head into 2025?
Yeah, really interesting area. So we've been obviously looking at rates of harm, trying to correlate data where we see it's been a really volatile year from an economic point of view. We all sort of know that we've had political change, we've had economic change, we've had a whole lot of sort of factors that have hit us from different aspects, and it's quite interesting because we had some real concerns at the beginning of the year that in tough economic times businesses would not invest as much in their people. So there was some real concern about that. But we're getting towards the end of the year, and we're starting to see kind of an interesting trend. There hasn't been so much acute harm this year in the construction industry as in other years. So usually in construction, from a fatalities point of view, workplace fatalities, there's around 8 to 11. This year, it's probably about half that. From an ACC claims perspective, we're way down as well. So we don't really understand all the reasons, but we think there's something around volatility within industry that causes it as well. So we're starting to understand that. But one of the things we have seen, and we lean quite heavily on research that's done by others, particularly places like University of Colorado, RMIT in Melbourne, and we're starting to see some real relationships between workers' skills and in particular supervisors. So leading hands, frontline supervisors, and the quality that they're really looking at, which seems to make a difference, is the investment that those leaders have had in leadership training. And I think a lot of us probably who are in different roles within construction, maybe senior management, project management, have probably come through and received some good foundation training in that area throughout their careers. But many of our frontline supervisors, we find that's a real gap. So a lot of them have come off the tools, been really good at the tools, great tradespeople, and then all of a sudden been given responsibility for a team of 5, 10 then all of a sudden it's 4 sites, but we haven't really backed them up with some of those great leadership skills that we need to support them. So things like, dealing with conflict planning, just pastoral care for your team, knowing, how people work. And I wouldn't call them soft skills. I think that's a real misnomer. I think they're more life skills that we just need in business. So we've seen a real we've seen a real difference in organisations that have invested in their people at that level, and probably the ones that haven't. And I think that goes right across the board, no matter what kind of farm you're looking at, because what we do find is that, when we've got great frontline leaders who have those skills, they're a lot more adept at dealing with not only the usual things that come up on construction sites, but also some of the quite volatile things that happen, because we have a very volatile workplace compared to, say, manufacturing site where you've got 4 walls, the same people, the same product every day. If you close your eyes on the construction site for 5 seconds, if you dare to, you'll open them again and something's changed, right? That's the nature of our business. And I think what we're seeing is that's probably the gap that we're starting to move into now is, how do we create and support not just classroom-based training, because I think the way people learn is different these days. It's more about that experiential training and support over time to actually give them those skills that they need to succeed. And I think that's a great area for us to work for in the future as well. So, we've been talking to mates about that. We've been talking to government about what they do in that area as well. We've been running a program for the last 2 years called Lead On, which has been based around that gap, which has been really successful. We're doing a independent evaluation of that at the moment, and that's going to be public. So what we hope to do is share that right across it to say, hey, look, there's some gold in here. It does make a difference. And what we're hoping to do is, as an industry, really pick this up and look after those frontline supervisors a lot better and invest in them.
Look, there's so much gold in what you've just said, especially that fact that these are life skills. We very much think about that here, that everyone through their construction careers carries their skills and quals in one hand and their people and life or strong skills in the other. And certainly we're really interested here at the Institute of Building and those people-based skills. It'd be great to talk with all of you about the Building Legends program at the Institute of Building and how we can work together on something that gets to the site managers, because that's also an identified group that we represent that we're very keen to equip in their management journey and what that means, because it is how they interact. And when you ask the managers of site managers what they want, it's very much about that people interaction skills. And it's interesting because I've just had, I sometimes do some mentoring with students. I've just had one in this morning, I have another in this afternoon. And of course, everything you learn in a classroom type environment is the skills and quals, not the people and life skills aspects. So I'm very interested in how we also get some of this people, life, strong skills into the classroom and vice versa. One of the other things the Institute of Building is working on is with CONCOVE, the Construction and Infrastructure Centre of Vocational Excellence, which was set up under the Rove Reform. It's a program for degree level apprenticeships or cadetships, which is very much about getting your degree on the job. So absolutely get your qualification in the work environment that you're going to be working in. Makes a huge amount of sense. That way you learn about, as you said, that dynamic, the changing environment, keep your eyes open, be looking in 5 directions at once, all the good stuff. Nice. Did anyone else want to jump into anything around the strong skills that we need going into 2025?
I think one of the things that's worked well for us, and apologies if I had to take my headphones off to maybe sound a bit clearer. As Whiti Ora is one of our new programs that we've been piloting, targeting those supervisors, but also those in the office. And Whiti Ora does bring some of those strong skills, some of those tools that the people that are in the office or in those supervisor roles can take away. So once again, it's an area that's been identified both in Australia and here in New Zealand, and programs have been developed for that. And in the new year in 2025, we also have the supervisor program coming into action as well, which I believe would work really well along with Lead On and maybe some of the programs that you've got there. So yeah,
Oh.
there's lots of resources and lots of programs coming online in 2025, and I think that all goes towards the reason why we're all here.
Nice. And it'll be great to see how Whiti Ora identifies the slightly different way we use language in the office and then at site. Sometimes, you know, you have to adjust the way you phrase things, don't you? And be slightly less direct in the office and, you know, pad things out a little bit. Yeah, so it's an interesting transfer of the way we communicate in construction. And I imagine it's a pretty steep learning curve for folks who are new to construction sites. You've got to say what you mean. Yeah.
Sorry, just quickly from those two big pieces of research I mentioned, that the communication and relationships piece came out really strongly. And just something that was interesting to note was that between different groups of workers that looked different. So where our apprentices talked about, you know, their leaders and wanting that strong communication, it was around the level of instruction and feeling they were expected to learn by osmosis and wishing that their leaders would guide them more gently through the process. And then when you looked at, say, your migrant workers, when they talked about the communication that they were seeking from their leadership, it was around that understanding of how to communicate and perhaps the best way to communicate. And they talked about language barriers, not only in terms of the language, but the way you speak about something or give instructions. So just to note it must be such a difficult space to sit in as a leader in the construction industry, where you're on a site with such a diversity of workers, of people in a shifting space. So just really interesting when you dig into it from those different perspectives.
And great point also that we can't ever kind of over-explain, right? You know, we can always check in, but I've certainly seen some project management firms have got their great internal learning programs where they've even gone to the extent of having videos about etiquette, like meeting etiquette. So an older director in the firm will do this to help some of the younger people coming in to say, this is when we expect you to make a phone call versus an email, you know, this is how you come into a room, this is how we settle at the start of a meeting. So I think, you know, that little term about etiquette and some of the minute things we can even explain. I think all that stuff is really useful, and it's easy once you've been in the industry for 20 or 30 years to forget all the stuff that you've learned along the way. Cool. Nice. Folks, we are now moving into a little bit more of the good stuff. So Chris, what types of wins or changes have you seen on the ground in the construction industry over the last few years since both Mates and CHASNZ have been in New Zealand?
Yes, I mentioned before, I think we're starting to understand our industry, what works and what doesn't, a lot more. I think in the past, particularly on the sort of acute harm side, we've kind of been led down a little bit of a garden path to a certain degree around a whole lot of stuff that didn't really make a difference to safety, but we felt we had to do anyway to sort of prove to a regulator or somebody else that we're doing our job. I think we're moving away from that. I can see signs where people are absolutely sort of questioning, you know, why things are done, and making and they're starting to realise that, you know, the best thing you can do is, like we said before, be active into your supervision, you know, be looking after people, being aware. It's not about sitting on a porticom filling out SSOPs or risk matrices or anything like that. That's not where the real safety happens. It's, you know, health and safety is an outcome of good work. And I think we're starting to realise that as an industry, not just in New Zealand, but around the world as well. So I think that's really good. We're starting to see signs of that. I think we're starting to, particularly with the new generation of young people coming through the industry, we're starting to think a lot differently about looking after ourselves for the long term. So one of the programs that we've worked with, and we've worked quite hand in hand with Mates on this as well, as our Work Should Not Hurt program, which is around the really high rate of chronic injury that we have in the industry. What we're seeing there is, particularly with the younger generation of tradespeople come through, small business owners, which dominate our industry, is the realisation that they can't really afford to have 20 to 30 days off work because they've bunged their shoulder or their back. You know, that's not good for them physically. It's also not good for them economically and productively as well. So there's a new realization that their biggest asset isn't the Ford Ranger and the gravel driveway, it's actually their bodies. And they're starting to have a totally different attitude to actually looking after themselves at work and not at work as well. So that's a real change that we've really noticed, that we're starting to talk to people about, which is great. So I think we're also starting to learn some of the tricks of the trade from the older generation. We call them the rusty nails, the ones that actually have survived through to their 40s and 50s without too many bad injuries. Usually they have a few, but they've also got some really good tales about how they got there and what works and what doesn't. And I think the realization is, they have got some gold in terms of the methods and techniques, down to the tools they use, the pace of work, how you planned your work. So we're starting to listen to those stories as well, and using that to actually train up the younger generation and make that information available to them, which is great, and that's how it should work. And I think that's from a resilience perspective around keeping people healthy and well, compared to making sure that they're looked after when they're not well. It works on either side, to make sure that, look, hey, if inevitably or unfortunately you do get injured or you do suffer some kind of harm, that we've got the right things there where you do get early help, so a small problem doesn't become a big problem. And making sure that people are aware of that. It is quite tough to actually get people to take time to look after themselves sometimes, because we've got an industry where a lot of people are on contract, and time away from the work site means less money in your pocket. There's an interesting thing going on in New Zealand at the moment with the health system. I don't know how many of you have tried to get a GP appointment at the moment, or even tried to sign on with a new GP. It's quite tough. We think that probably about 1 in 4 construction workers actually have a GP, so they're not traditionally well connected with the health system. There's something in there as well. So what we need to do is probably rely even more on providing people with the opportunities for helping themselves. So not medicalising every issue, but hey, there are some things you can do both on the mental health side, both on the physical health side, to actually look after yourselves a lot better. So you're not so reliant on needing that GP appointment, and hopefully you don't end up in the weekend in the ED because it's got so bad.
Absolutely. That's a great way to waste 12 hours. So are we going to bring more health advice and practitioners to the sites? I'm aware of the work that CHASNZ does with skin cancer, and the whole kind of mole map or mole checking that comes to the site, and obviously Stroke Foundation has got work coming to site and testing. So do you think we're going to see more of firms bringing GPs or physios to sites to check people out?
I think it's tough because the whole health system is under a lot of pressure in New Zealand at the moment, and all of us know that we haven't got enough doctors, nurses, hospitals, facilities, for our population. We're playing catch up on that. There's a lot of pressure there. But what we are seeing, I guess, with larger organisations, is they are doing that. It's probably the small ones which aren't, regularly working or don't have the ability to do that we've got to actually provide that support with a bit more. And this is, we've just got to be smarter at providing that support.
Yes, and of course our industry is 90% SMEs, less than 5 people.
Yeah.
Are there any other wins or changes that we're noticing in the health, safety and wellbeing space that we want to talk about?
I think from my perspective, I've been in the really interesting position here at Mates, where I was part of the first team based outside of Auckland since Mates started in New Zealand. So I've been in Christchurch since early 2022. And even in that small time, you've seen a huge shift in attitude. And for those that are probably more familiar with Christchurch, such as myself or the South Island, it can often be a harder group of people to tap into. We're a bit more stubborn to change. But the boom bust cycle of the industry is evident, like no matter where you travel through New Zealand. But one of the biggest shifts that I think I have seen is that people understand there's a need, there's a requirement about how we incorporate mental health within the workspace. And the whole sort of shift in culture, it's been massive, because obviously we're trying to empower people with these tools and abilities. And it's only going to matter if people buy into that and they bring that to the table. And I guess some examples of shifts of attitude that I've seen that have been huge and massive. You take an example, say for whatever reason, someone's no longer showing up to work, and I've had supervisors, foremen call me in these instances where normally in the past, prior to any of the mates training or us coming in and talk, they would have looked at that from purely a disciplinary sort of standpoint, where people are now telling me that, okay, this doesn't quite sit right with me. Maybe there's more going on here, and I wish to explore it. So those sort of attitude shifts, though it seems like a small thing, have had like this massive result in building that culture, because we are enabling workers to better speak up if they're struggling, but we're also making sure that our leadership elements within the workspace are open and willing to accepting when people are reaching out. And I think that's where that sort of whole leadership landscape has shifted. And as Chris said earlier, that pastoral care element is a huge part of it. So I think that's been one of the biggest shifts I've noticed.
Nice. I like that you were noticing that we're getting more curious about checking in with our mates. And then that's a really good transition to our last question, which is to you, John, which is about, as we're all preparing for the summer barbecue season, can you tell us a bit about how we will be igniting hope? And I love that phrase, noticing that it's just the hope we're igniting over the barbecue. Can you tell us about the good stuff, the stories and anecdotes that we can be passing on to the people that we're in touch with this summer? And another great phrase from mates around the 10 seconds of courage, how we can help motivate our friends and whānau to have that 10 seconds of courage. Yeah, John, tell us a bit about some tips there.
Yeah, look, I think the 10 seconds of courage I'll leave to Nate, because he's the superhero that goes out there every day explaining what that looks like. It's amazing how much a smile changes someone's perspective on the day. And we see it on different social media platforms where, just smile at somebody and say hi and check in on people. Those are just whole bunch of small things. And, if you think about it, all the connections you have in a day, just to smile and say hello, that goes a long way straight away. I think keeping yourself in a good place. And I always talk about this time of the year is the best time to bring the shield out. And the shield is an acronym to make sure you're sleeping well. H is helping others, making sure you're interacting with others as well. So you're not just keeping yourself isolated. You're getting your exercise in. You're constantly learning, all right? And then you keep your diet in check. And that's just a small balance shield. And people think, heading into Christmas, it's too frantic, too hectic. But if you don't have that in place, then things do get into a bit of a stressful mode. So there's a whole bunch of little things we can do. But around the barbecue, well, that's a different scenario, because you do have those opportunities to maybe look at some key areas or some opportunities to have conversations with others. And I think that's a great segue into Nate to just finish off our little piece with some good tools.
Yeah, and I think that the discussion of 10 seconds of courage, it's big for us. I know there's a lot of emphasis. It takes a lot of courage for people to speak out when they're struggling, but on the flip side of that, it takes just as much, if not more, courage to step into the space of a mate when you recognize that they're struggling. So courage isn't just a thing that you'll pluck out of thin air either. It's a culmination of factors, and I think education is probably the biggest part of that. If people are confident in their ability to step in, they're more likely to. They're going to find that courage. And one thing that we often do in our training is we highlight what it looks like if someone's potentially struggling or distressed. And it's not, I always try to bring it to a grassroots level. Like, everyone can recognize this. If you were to think about it for a minute, how would I recognize if someone in my life, my partner, my friends, my family, what sticks out to me that shows that they may be struggling? Maybe it's simply that they're more distant than usual, right? Someone that may be more social, all of a sudden is avoiding those social interactions. These could be little things, but unless we're stepping into these spaces and asking questions when we're seeing these invitations or behaviors that are changed, right, we're not going to know the answers. And we've got a couple slides that you can bring up of ways of how we can actually go about asking these questions. And there's tons of them, right? But these are some really good examples. And what I like about them is it's hard enough to ask these questions, not only of yourself, but also to a mate doing it rough. And these are just good ways to sort of segue into their conversation. And I'm sure we may have asked it before, I've noticed things have been rough lately. Is there anything I can do to help? Simple as, or, I can tell you're dealing with a lot. Let's grab a coffee and have a chat if you want to. Right? These are some of the tools that we're equipping people. And if you could just go to that next slide as well. So, and, even for yourself, if you're in that position, very hard to ask these questions, but, we try and give people these tools. Maybe it's as simple as, hey, mate, I'm struggling and, I'm just not sure what to do. Right. So that's what it is about for us here in terms of that, starting that conversation where we're actually equipping people with these tools. And that's where that sort of courage, that igniting to hope is formed from.
That's awesome. I think those are gold, and we'll make sure that we share those in the resources section of the website alongside with the recording of today. Hey folks, thank you very much for all your time. I feel like we could probably talk for another 45 minutes, but that's us for today. Our next Industry Insights will be in the new year on the 12th of February, where we check in around marketing. We'll be talking with Mike Olds from Rockcoat and Rixie from Hirepool, and we're going to be talking about marketing yourself, your business, your services, which is a lot about your kind of personal branding and sticking up for yourself, and a little bit about business development and navigation in the market at the moment. Cool. So that's ka kite anō from myself and the Institute of Building. Thanks very much to Nate, Lauren, Chris and John. And John, if you could kindly close us out with a karakia, and we'll say thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And once again, thank you, Pamela, for having us. A community of care, a community of help goes a long way to making some change. So just on that, let's just close off. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o te tātou ariki a ihu karaiti. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, te wairua tapu, ake ake. Āmene. Thank you very much, team.
Thank
Thank you.
Ka kite.